And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Attorney Craig Steger here, practicing in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Um, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some really good comments or questions that people have made in some recent videos that I put out. A couple of videos specifically have dealt with trucking accidents. The one video involved a very large verdict against a trucking company in Texas, where a car, it was icy conditions, a car on the opposite side of the interstate, it lost control on the ice and slid across the median in front of a semi going in the other direction. And there was a very large verdict against the trucking company in that case. And so people had some strong reactions to that verdict. The other one involved an underride claim, big verdict against the manufacturer of semi trailers. There was a car that rear ended a semi trailer. Looks like it was either stopped or slowed in traffic. Rear ended the back of the trailer, and it looks like the DOT bar on the back either failed or bent or broke or whatever. And the two gentlemen in the car were killed. And that led to a very large verdict against the trailer manufacturer, on the grounds, on the basis that they had a safer design and never released it soon enough. They didn't. They kind of sat on that and actually lobbied regulators to keep from making that type of design, which was apparently better, mandatory. So those are two videos I put out, and there's been a lot of reaction to those videos. And I'm not going to be able to respond to all the comments. I generally respond to the comments in the videos themselves, but I wanted to specifically talk about a few that came up, and just discuss them in this live stream a little bit. Before I do that, my wife sent me this video. This is out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I'm going to see if I can put this on the screen. And it was just came out the other day. It caused kind of a big. This is up in Eagan, Minnesota. Caused kind of a big traffic backup. So I just want to show you guys this video quick here. So here you can see there's a wrecker pulling a wrecker, a flatbed, um, tow truck or whatever, and they're merging on, and you're going to see that the wrecker loses the vehicle that he was towing, and it wanders out into traffic, and causes a big mess. Fortunately, from what I've heard so far, this didn't result in any serious injuries, but boy, it could have been a lot worse. So, so that person had a bad day. Like I said, I'm glad that it doesn't sound like anyone was seriously injured. But those are the kinds of things that can happen out on the roadway. I think it's safe to assume that the company that was operating the initial tow truck is probably going to have a claim against them, certainly for property damage they caused. Hard to say what actually caused that, but it seems like there's a good chance that it was um, user error. Now, it could be that something failed, something mechanically failed, but I would imagine user error is a likely blame for that. So I'll be kind of watching that one since it just happened a few days ago in Minnesota. Um, anyway, so on to the comments. Let me talk. I'm going to talk primarily about the Underride um, case, and I should see if I can. Um, Let me see here if I can present an image from that. Bear with me. Let's do this. I don't have that image in front of me, so you might be able to see it on some of these. So let me put this one on the stage here. You can see here in the top right corner, it was a video I did on a $462 million verdict. Don't remember. I think this was in St. Louis, if I recall correctly. And so created a whole bunch of comments and discussion about these so-called DOT bars. Have also heard them called Mansfield bars. A number of people corrected me on that since I had not heard that term before. Incidentally, it's named after a somewhat famous actress in the 1960s named Jane Mansfield, who her and I think a couple of other adults were killed in a really tragic crash down in like Louisiana, I believe, where their car slid under the back of a semi that did not have any kind of bar on the back, and that sort of famous crash, famous death resulted in efforts to get these bars mandated by the government, which I think they were not for another 15, 20 years. And then there was some recent changes, I guess, to the regulation to make them even a little better, maybe in 2022. I'll be doing a video on that in the future, as well as I'm going to do a video just on the whole origin of these safety bars, these Mansfield bars. It's kind of an interesting story. But someone pointed out why school buses or why school buses. Someone had asked why school buses don't have these bars under them. I thought, well, that's actually a good question. I don't know, and so someone commented and was wondering why there isn't a standard for bumper height. Now, I'm not sure if that stands for the bumper on the school bus or the bumper on cars, maybe both. But I actually did a little research into the school bus issue, and I'm going to do I think I'm going to do a separate video on that. But as I understand it, there's a number of explanations for why the Mansfield bar type things are not necessarily on school buses. One of the explanations being that the axles are much further, the rear axles are much further ahead on a school bus, and because of that, the school bus would be at risk of getting hung up going down through dips and stuff because the back end sticks out a ways, and so these bars could be problematic for that. I think the other, maybe more likely reason is because of what's being hauled, right? A semi trailer is hauling cargo. Not that the cargo isn't valuable, but it's not little kids, right? It's not kids riding around a school bus. And how that energy is displaced and what kind of damage it might do inside the school bus if there was this apparatus on the back from a high-speed rear impact. I would venture to guess that it's more about the safety of the kids inside the school bus who aren't seat belted, and a lot, if they're stopped in traffic, they may be up walking, getting on and off the bus, and getting in one of these things where I think more of the energy is absorbed by the, let's say, the back of the vehicle, might be problematic for the kids involved. That's just my speculation and based on some of the initial research that I've done. If there are people that have more inside information on that, engineering or otherwise, I'd be certainly interested in hearing from that. But that was a good question about school buses. The other thing is this: school buses generally are stopping in lower speed situations. The Mansfield bars, as I understand, one of the reasons they implemented them is because semis are often out on highways and interstates where the risk of more of a high speed rear end collision is higher. And we want to protect against very serious injuries from underrides. So I think that might be part of it. But like I said, I'm going to do a separate video on the school bus situation once I can look into that a little bit more. But that was a good question. Um, this was from a trucker. Um, the bar you were talking about was mandated after a famous crash. That was the Mansfield, Jane Mansfield death, I guess. It was brought in to stop cars from going under it. Because it's a mandate with a standardized design, companies now have a big hook under their docks to hook the trailer and prevent someone from driving away while someone is in the trailer. Um, that's a interesting safety feature that I wasn't aware of. It's probably also maybe maybe it keeps people from stealing trailers if they're left at a dock and they're not hooked up. But um, I was not aware of this. There's actually a safety benefit to workers. Let's see, warehouse workers, um, forklift drivers, things like that might be inside the vehicle. Keeps the someone from taking off while they're inside. So that's a good point. Hadn't considered that. Another one pointed out that the DOT bumper was made famous by this California actress. But here's a interesting comment. He says that the jury got this completely wrong. The driver of the car was at fault. There is no reason the trailer manufacturer should be held liable for the moron who ended his and another's life while running under a semi trailer. And I certainly can appreciate that sentiment. Um, Something I might just offer in response to this is, um, I mean, ultimately, it's the driver of the vehicle that rear ends them that causes it, right? So in this case, at least there was a passenger in the vehicle who presumably didn't do anything wrong other than maybe riding with this person. So you can certainly envision a situation where innocent people are seriously injured in these crashes who had nothing to do with causing the crash. I think you can also anticipate situations where people are being careful and traffic suddenly stops. I know, like in, like dust storms and things like that. So I don't know that it necessarily follows that it's always some grave fault that causes these rear end collisions. Sometimes people are just, we're not paying attention enough. And while that might be negligence, I think the question is whether that ought to more or less be a death sentence for someone, not even considering the fact that there's going to be passengers, children, other people in the vehicle that didn't cause the crash. So I think that's something to think about when we're assessing fault here. Is it's foreseeable. I mean, these standards come about from the idea that it's foreseeable that crashes are going to happen, even if the crash is the fault of the driver that runs into you. It's sort of like seatbelts and airbags. Like, um, it's not, obviously the manufacturer of the car doesn't cause the crash, but if they have seatbelts in there, those seatbelts should operate correctly, correct? Those seatbelts are designed to keep people safer in the event of a crash. And so I think it's just worth considering the various situations where this can happen. Um, yeah, that's exactly right. There's driving is dangerous, right? Even if you're being careful, but where is there any one of us on the road that's 100% careful 100% of the time? No, maybe we grab our phone, we're looking at something off to the side of the road or whatever. So those things happen, and these kinds of safety devices are there to minimize the carnage from these things when they happen. It's sort of like with the Ford Pinto case, which I talked about in a few videos ago. It wasn't Ford's fault that people got in crashes and rear end accidents, but it sure made their situation much more grave if the car also started on fire. So it's a similar concept here when it comes to these safety devices that can help protect people or make their injuries less severe or death less likely with some safety features for reasonably foreseeable events, right? Um, yeah, I mean, there's always, so I'm guessing there are situations where these DOT bumpers could actually cause more injuries than they prevent. That's just a reality of life. Some people will say seatbelts can make certain crashes more dangerous, airbags, whatever. But as a general proposition, in the majority of situations, seatbelts and airbags are going to make people safer. And I think in the majority of situations, having these underride bars are going to make people um, less, risk to serious injury or death. Um, yeah, that's. I wonder how long ago that was. That's very tragic. Um, I mean, I don't know how long these bars have been out. It sounds like since the '80s. And there's been, and I suspect that older trailers already on the road may not have been subject to these new rules. There's also discussion going on about whether to add similar protection to the sides of semis because there are people that regularly get slide into the side of a semi, and the same thing happens. Actually, going to talk about uh, a really bad accident next week that happened in Iowa, where a young lady slid under the side of a semi in a foggy conditions, and she was severely injured. So that's another thing to consider. Um, this kind of relating to that, someone pointed out to me that in the EU, um, well, back guards and side guards. So I think that's actually not that uncommon. I see that quite a bit in products liability situations where the EU, European Union, for those that don't know what that is, tends to be more proactive, more aggressive in pursuing and imposing safety measures now. Um, I'm a little bit old school this way too. Some of those safety features can be real annoyances. Um, gas cans and I know that sometimes like on lawnmowers and stuff like that, some of that safety stuff can be kind of an annoyance, but it's there for a purpose. But it's generally true that that Europe is ahead of the U.S. when it comes to adopting and requiring these safety features. But the advantage to that is we can kind of see how it plays out. We get a chance to see how expensive it is. Are there any drawbacks? Are there unforeseen consequences of having side guards, for example, and things like that? So anyway, I'm not surprised. I wasn't aware, but I'm not surprised that the EU has had these longer than the US and has already mandated the side ones. I'll do another video on that. I'll have to do a little research and see um, some of those trailers. I had not heard that. Here is another comment. This person says there ought to be virtually no scenario where a rear ending is the fault of the vehicle in front. Um, fair, although in this case it was the manufacturer was at fault. I don't think that the truck driver or the trucking company was alleged to have done anything wrong. It was purely the manufacturer of the trailer that was at fault here. And this person says if speed limits slash warning speeds don't account for blind crests or curves, then the speed limit is too high and it is an engineering failure. Many rural roads do not have quote nanny state unquote speed limits, and they expect drivers to recognize dangerous geometry and autonomously slow down. I think they meant automatically, probably autocorrect, which is a dangerous approach to speed management. This is while I generally agree with the safe systems approach that mistakes should not be fatal. In this case, I'm not going to read the rest of the comment. Um, but it, so I think this person, from based on the research that I've done, I don't know that this person quite understands why they've imposed these things. Um, as I understand it, as I mentioned a little earlier, these DOT bars, these Mansfield bars, are actually on semis as opposed to other vehicles, primarily because they are out on highways that generally have higher speeds. It's not really for local traffic, hills, and rural areas. It's because they're on the interstate at high speed, and things happen. You saw that video I did at the beginning of this show, where the you know traffic was moving along. I don't know if that was an interstate, but it was four lane traffic, and the tow truck that was merging onto it lost what it was hauling, and it moved out, and everyone came to a complete stop. Well, that semi came to a complete, very quick stop, and if someone behind him doesn't see it in time, and they slide into the back of that semi, well, those things can happen at reasonably high speed. So I think, as I understand, I'm not an engineer, but as I understand it, these things are in place specifically for higher speed situations because of the severe injuries that can and predictably do happen if there isn't adequate protection under the back of these trailers and similar equipment. So this person says, I can think of one scenario where a truly innocent driver can end up like this car. Let's say you are stopped behind this truck, and the car behind you slams into you at high speed. Even if your brakes were fully applied, you left plenty of space. Kind of like what I was just talking about, right? You could, or you could be shoved into the rear of the trailer. So that's a good example. Maybe you come to a stop, but someone behind you pushes you into the back of the semi trailer. In this case, you deserve to live, and your next of kin should receive a big settlement. But that scenario is generally rare. While we are prolific tailgaters who frequently cause pileups, the pileups are usually truck on truck or car on car because cars can see stop. Excuse me, see stop trucks ahead even when they are tailgating. Yeah, I mean, I think the point I would make is this. Um, I don't think it's so much statistically what's the cause of the crash. And again, I think it consider accepts the fact that people rear-ending semis may very well be the cause of that, but not necessarily they're out driving drunk or driving fast. They just don't react quick enough, right? Something as simple as a mom on the way to school with her kids is distracted by one of the kids, and looks up and it's too late, right? I mean, those things can happen. Those are foreseeable situations, and that's what these rules are designed. So it's really important to, I think, step back from the concept of fault and just understand that these accept the fact that people are going to be causing their own causing these crashes, but they're still entitled to protection and safety if it can be done so reasonably. And the DOT bars are one example of that. So yeah, I mean, I know you're out west where there's a lot more traffic, but I think eh, just the nature of travel, urban travel is such that you have a lot of cars on the road, and if there the other thing is this: if you're behind a semi, you really can't see what's going on in front of the semi. The semi can, right? And if the semi has to slam on the brakes or something that happens, um, you just may not have that warning. And yes, in the perfect world, we all stay what 3, 4 car lengths behind as we're taught in driver's ed, but realistically, that's not actually how people drive, right? So something to keep in mind. Um, I'm going to switch gears to a little different. I have a couple comments on another video that I did, relating to another verdict. This was down in Texas. It was a huge verdict, got a lot of attention. And it was a case where it was icy conditions and they were traveling on either interstate or 4-lane roads. So there's 2 lanes in each direction separated by a median. And a, a pickup truck, I think, coming from one direction was operated by someone. And then there was like a mom in the passenger seat. And then there was like 3 kids in the back. And the driver of that pickup truck slid across the roadway on the ice and ended up in front of this semi who tried to stop, couldn't stop, hit him, and it was bad. It was very bad. There was at least one of the children were killed. I think one or two of them were severely injured. And so there was a lot of, uh, I guess, outrage over this verdict, which, you know, seems to be like, why is the trucking company responsible when they were doing what they were supposed to do, presumably? Well, that case is currently on appeal in front of the Texas Supreme Court, as I understand it. So I'm it's possible that result is going to get overturned, but I think it's worth looking at to understand the facts just a little bit better. Um, so one of the concepts that I have learned in the trucking cases that I've handled myself is that there is this notion of defensive driving, and trucking companies can and should train their drivers to be in defensive driving, which includes looking out for other cars that are not necessarily being safe themselves. Because you can cause so much damage and harm to other people because you're driving a big vehicle, you need to be watching out for other people, even if they're not paying attention. And the fact that someone, let's say, pulls in front of you is not an excuse to run them over if you have an opportunity to stop, right? And so there is defensive driving imposes on the driver the duty to not only be watching out for themselves, but be watching out for other people, specifically because of the amount of damage that can be done by a fully loaded semi or even a partially loaded semi. So that's something to keep in mind. Is that is a thing. Like defensive driving is a thing. It doesn't mean that truckers should be um, absolutely liable, but it does impose upon them a duty. And to kind of put it in context of this case, um, there was evidence. The evidence that the plaintiffs presented in that case was that it was so icy, this truck should have really pulled over or should have been going much slower. And they I think it was icy and they were going, let's say, 60 miles per hour, even though the speed limit was higher than that. But I think the plaintiff relied upon how was it, DOT manuals or CDL manuals, things like that. So like if the road is icy, you need to go down to like 10 or 15 miles per hour. Now whether that's actually what people do or not is one thing, but that was sort of the genesis of that. And for what it's worth, the majority of fault was imposed on the trucking company. I think 70% of that went on Werner, who was the trucking company, and I believe like 16% went on the driver of the pickup truck that lost control, and only 14% was on the actual truck driver. So if you understand that verdict, the truck driver was found to be only 14% responsible. The majority of fault was on someone else, but you know, the that that kind of gets, lost in the shuffle or whatever because people are, understandably um worked up about $100 million verdict, right? um oh, I guess I just answered this question. um so someone said, was the trucking company found 100% responsible in their jurisdiction, there would be an apportionment of liability? um I think I just answered that, but yeah, in I don't know what the rules are in Texas, but in most states there's going to be an apportionment of liability. And so I think in that case, like I said, I think the jury found Werner to be like 70% at fault, and then the other 30% was divided. I think 16% for the driver of the pickup truck, and 14% for the driver of the semi. Yeah, I knew I was going to get to it. um, but so yeah, I mean, the, these kinds of cases tend to make the headlines because when a crash happens, the damages tend to be severe, the injuries tend to be severe, and so these quote unquote nuclear verdicts, which I get it, they're shocking. Um, there's sometimes a reason behind it, especially like, for example, on the one involving the Underride. device. The allegations in that case were that the trailer manufacturer had a safer design, I think a sturdier design that maybe wouldn't have buckled um, under the circumstances of that crash, and chose not to impose it for financial reasons because of the cost of, I don't know, retrofitting old trailers. They had the technology similar to the verdict against Ford on its Super Duty pickups that I did um, a couple weeks ago. If I think of that, I'll link to that video if you want to check that out. But it was a similar thing where Ford had allegedly had the technology to make a safer roof and chose not to do it. And then also, instead of spending the money to make their trucks or make the trailers safer, they actually spent that money lobbying the regulators not to make that mandatory. Okay. So that's where these punitive damage awards come in, and why they're so high is the thought process behind the punitive damages is if we don't make it big enough, the company will just write that off as a cost of doing business. But if it's enough money, eventually they'll realize that it's worth investing the money and making things safer, to avoid these kinds of things. So that's kind of what goes on to the punitive damage awards. It's not so much that a particular crash, a particular injury justified that kind of damages, but it tends to look much more deeply into the situation, to the company. What have they done? How much money have they saved by not implementing safety measures, things like that. And so it's designed to hurt. It's designed to hurt, to compel companies, corporations to take action to avoid these kinds of results in the future. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, I have um, I have some other cases that I'll be talking about, some big verdicts that I think will generate similar questions and concerns that people have. But I think it's useful to have these kinds of discussions, and I'll do my best to try and explain some of these things, and the questions that people have are I understand why you have those questions, and so I'll do my best to try and dig into it and answer that. So maybe it'll make a little more sense. Maybe you won't totally agree, but hopefully it'll help put it in context a little bit. So anyway, good seeing you two guys in the chat. I appreciate your comments. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this live stream up. I will be back next week. Um, with a couple other videos talking about some big verdicts, and then I'll probably use the live stream to more specifically react to some of the comments. I think this is helpful for me, and I think hopefully it's helpful for people. So yeah, I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have a terrific weekend, and we'll catch you next week. So till next time, everyone, have a good one.